going to do that now. Okay, so just a refresher probably for many of you, active learning is kind of linked to the concept of constructive alignment. I mean, the theory goes back to Bonville and Eason in the 90s, and the idea that active learning approaches really are there to develop student skills in terms of the higher order thinking skills that we find in Bloom's taxonomy. Again, it's something that you are probably familiar with. So basically, we are doing group discussions and forum posts and Mentimeters to kind of move beyond those foundational stages of learning. So we want our students to not just understand and remember and pass an exam, right? We want them to move up this pyramid up to be able to apply and analyze what they've learned, maybe more passively in lectures. So things like that they can apply a new concept and solve a problem that is new to them, or create something completely new like a dissertation. So we know that higher order learning skills are more effective and the learning sticks. That's why we do it, right? So just a brief refresher of why we bother with this at all. Now, active learning in the classroom, what it looks like, we've just discussed, and you're doing many of these things. So mainly talking and listening, right? So students actively process information when they ask and answer questions, comment or present and explain an issue that has been presented to them. And they really go beyond passive listening then, because when you do a group discussion, you give them the opportunity to relate and analyze what they're hearing. And that basically makes it more active. However, writing is also a form of active learning, because that also encourages students to actively process information by putting it in their own words. And it can really help students to organize their thoughts and reflections and prepare them for that discussion. And I don't know whether you agree with me, but sometimes we put a lot of emphasis on talking in class, right? And less on writing. And you might argue, well, that's covered by the assessments, the written assessments. That's where students get a chance to write. But often in our in-person classes, especially, we focus very much on verbal engagement. Now, reading itself can also be active, but it needs to be designed more strategically to make it active. So if you just give students a text and ask them to read, the likelihood is that the majority of students are probably going about it in a very passive way. To get it done, they're probably just scanning through it. But if we provide some questions, summary exercises, or the opportunities to post about the reading or reflect on it, then we can actually transform that into an active process. And I know it's difficult to engage students in asynchronous tasks. I can assure you we know that from the PG CAP because of time management issues, and it's just really hard to make that transformation. And then reflecting itself is also an active process. So often we pack our classes really full of information, right? So there's a bit of an overload, and often we don't allow for pauses where students actually reflect on the material and process it in a way that they can make connections between something that they've learned before in the previous lecture, or kind of make connections to what might come after. So often it's very compressed, what we're trying to do, which our curriculum is pretty full. I think that the point I'm trying to make is really that our predisposition when we think about active learning is that we emphasize talking, okay? We think that if students talk in our class and they're verbally engaged, that learning takes place, that a lot of and deep learning takes place. But that's a little bit of a conflation, okay? Just because people are discussing well, first of all, it doesn't mean that they are deeply engaged. And second, the students that are quiet, they might be engaged, but it's not visible to you. I think we as teachers rely a lot on the verbal engagement for our own feedback of how our class goes. So I'm emphasizing this just to clarify that this is our very culturally specific position from which we approach teaching. And this is what we go, this is the expectations we go into classrooms with. And then when we're met with silence or not, no verbal engagement, we think something is wrong. Okay. And what I'm trying to say with this class is that that is not necessarily the case. Maybe there's nothing wrong. It's often just a clash of expectations. So bearing that in mind, that this is our predisposition, it's culturally specific, this is what we expect from our classes. Your students might actually come from a very different educational culture where they have formed different expectations of what learning looks like. I'm saying this on the basis of research that I have done with the Effective Learning Advisor for International Students in Student Learning Development. We did a little research project where we ran focus group with international students. And mainly we were interested in the transition experience. So what they expected when they came to the UK, how it actually then transpired. So what kind of experience they had. We explicitly didn't try to frame it as challenges, because often when we think about international students, we immediately jump to the challenges they might be experiencing. And that is not to say that they don't have challenges. They do, of course they do. But often if we focus on challenges, we run the risk of tapping into deficit narratives of international students as not being ready or fit to study here, or have some sort of skills to catch up on. So we try to avoid that. And the themes that we came out of the focus groups were basically those three major themes: cultural transition, academic transition, and the dissertation journey. And within the cultural transition theme, there was a sub-theme that we found quite interesting, and that was all around communication. So communication barriers, less in terms of language barriers, more in terms of expectations of what happens in classes. So those international students were just as frustrated as you are as teachers of the struggle of other international students to take part in active learning. So these are just some quotes here from our focus group participants where they commented on their experience. So the first one was from a student who was in an economics postgraduate taught program and really observed the lecturer struggling. And as you can see here, the lecturer was really begging the class to do an interactive thing, and it failed. And there was only a handful of students engaged. And this was mirrored by another participant who says, yeah, they weren't actively participating. And to caveat this, those international students were in classes where they were faced with one nationality. So basically the cohort was very homogeneous, actually, just representing one nationality. And rather than saying international students have problems engaging actively, it's actually homogeneous cohorts that really discourage active learning or that transition into the educational culture that we have here. But I also wanted to add that even for international students, and I think for any students, they feel uncomfortable interacting with other people just as much as home students find it uncomfortable. So these are very universal experiences. and are not just limited to international students or home students or to students of one particular nationality. So this is sort of what we found. And I just wanted to highlight this, that there are differences within the international student cohort, and to basically not generalize about that is really important. Now I want to play a video which I found really useful in highlighting what the differences of experiences might be between here and the international students we see most in our universities. So Chinese learners are basically largely represented in our international student cohorts, as well as students from India. And this video I'm going to show is actually from Canada. And it is a project, again, where students were asked about their experience. Now I'm just going to need to find that video. Just give me a second. Oh, that's odd. You know how when you look for the window that has the video and you can't find it? That's me right now. But now I found it. So just to set this up, so this is a video from Quantum Polytechnic University in Canada. And the reason I'm showing it because we have a very similar educational culture here in the UK. And because the two student groups that are represented in this video are also the biggest student groups that we are working with here. So it might give you some useful insight of how it looks like from the student point of view. So it's just, it's about 2 to 3 minutes long. Let me know if you can't hear it for some reason, but it should work.
So a classroom, a university classroom back in India is bigger. It has almost 45 to 60 students. That would be thrice the size of what we have here at KBO. And then teachers actually just read through the book and try and explain where an explanation is needed. And university classrooms back in India, as far as a bachelor's in law kind of program is concerned, we did not have much of audio-visual presentations. So yeah, it was just reading from the book, reading from the bare acts, the legislations, and then the teacher explaining us the concepts. That's it.
I have the opportunity to teach as a professor for China Communication University. The whole study system in China probably will be different between in Canada. It's because normally it's very serious that students versus teachers in the university. Normally the habit or behavior from most Chinese students is that they're very serious following what the teacher is talking about. Read a lot of notes on the class, go back to a lot of homeworks, try to remember a lot from the textbooks. For this part, they have the chance towards the Chinese students. But compared with the education in Canada, it's totally different because here, for most courses, the instructor encourage the students to share more thoughts in the class regarding the content of the test or regarding any topic of that. Encourage you to present more your thoughts in the class. So that's probably a big challenge for most Chinese students. They are not have more experience to present in the class, to share their thoughts. So that's the difference, I think, from different systems.
Okay, so just to say, this is part of a larger video suite that I would I can recommend you check out, because there's lots of other videos about international student experiences. And we also have our own version here at the University of Glasgow called the International Student Starter Pack, which is meant, it's a Moodle resource for both student and staff to look at the specific experience of international students that come to our university, and how to work with those experiences. So I'm just gonna head back to my slide, and I wanted to bring you in at this point and just see what. So thanks very much for those thoughts. So let's think a little about what we can do. So this is the issue: clashing expectations. There's also often with PGT programs really short time to actually do these things at all, with students that have never had the experience or very little experience of active learning in the way we see it. So barriers then that we know of, language barriers obviously are a reality, and often that manifests in just needing more time to verbalize thoughts. So even when you give students a bit more time in class to do that, it might have a positive impact on that verbal engagement. But then, as we talked about, there is a misalignment of student staff expectations in that conflation of active learning with verbal discussion, and that some international students might actually not be socialized in that way. That gives them the confidence to speak up in class. They might have never been asked about their opinion before, or made to present it. So some quick fixes before we go to a kind of more intentional framework. So what we could all do to remove some of these barriers, you can find in Lee et al. 2017 in their study on intercultural learning teaching. You can improve classroom climate by, for example, learning names and attempt correct pronunciation. And I'm saying this with laughing because I know how unfeasible that is if you have a massive cohort. So if you are lucky enough to work with small student numbers, to actually be able to learn names from other countries and really attempt to say them out loud will be very well received, because it's kind of a recognition of student identities, where they're coming from, and that they see you make an effort, and that creates a good classroom climate, because it models behavior that other students can copy as well. You can also ask students at the beginning of term, are they familiar with active learning at all? And you can explain the value of that, perhaps integrating that in the first few sessions, a little bit like I did at the beginning, just to make the connection between active learning and higher levels of learning, and how we want to support that. Incorporating time for quiet writing and organization of thoughts before verbal discussion, as I just said, can make a difference. You might also then check in again with ungraded post-discussion reflections, so that gives students the kind of just the chance to feedback of whether it works, the kind of small changes that you're doing, and ask them how they might feel, what actually makes them feel included. You know, we might be thinking students feel included if they are confident enough to speak up, but maybe it's something else that works for them. And maybe there are unaddressed needs or barriers that you don't know about, that they can tell you. So those are some quick wins. But let's also spend a bit of time on looking at a framework which might actually help to tackle the issue in the design phase of the course. So the framework I'm referring to is Acutis. Interaction for Learning framework. Akudisi et al. Are based in Australia, and they have quite a long history of working with international students. And what their motivation for putting this framework together was really to make home students and international students interact, because they found that students stay within their own peer groups that they feel comfortable with. So you really have a lack of interaction between home students and international students. So that's what they try to do. So what I'm going to talk through in the next few minutes is really just the first three, but I would encourage you to check it out. They have really good examples. And I don't know about you, but it always helps me if I have a framework where I can go through different steps bit by bit and check them off when I design my courses and classes. So first of all, an intentional learning design, so really planning for interaction. Don't expect it to happen. That doesn't work. So without intentions, students will stay within their own peer groups. They will stay with that familiar reference system. That's just human nature. And it requires a bit of forethought to make peer interaction happen. And if we formalize peer interaction, maybe even as part of our intended learning outcomes or our assessment tasks, we can set a framework for that to happen. So it's almost like making students interact with other students. And that can happen in many different ways. So they have cited a few examples where lecturers went about forming groups based on, for example, one lecturer worked in engineering and he put groups together for the whole of the semester. But the way the groups were formed were not like self-selecting. It was really around skills and previous experiences. So he made sure that each group had a diversity of those, and then let them basically work on a problem together. And also clarify to students how that might link to their graded attributes and the skills they might need in the workplace. And a specific example also came from marketing, where a lecturer put groups together. I think she did groups of 3, where one student had to interview students from a particular culture and sort of explore the market from that culture and how to write an ad or a campaign for that particular culture. So where really the learning design draws on the student diversity and experience and brings that in and connects it with subject knowledge. If you can do that, you can embed interaction a bit more firmly. Team-based learning, I'm sure a lot of you might already be doing that. For example, the conversion course in psychology, they have very intercultural group work projects going on. And that doesn't come without its own challenges. So this is just sort of the planning phase, how you can make that interaction a bit more formal, embedded in the design. So then it's about, the second step is thinking about how to set the scene. So how to create the environment for that interaction to happen. So this might, so if you just think, so you can think about it in the long term, like, or medium to long term, where you think about the whole semester and think about how can you make those intercultural groups work together actively and constructively. But you can also just look at your class and clarify for yourself what you want to happen. So for example, if your goal in one of the classes is a big plenary discussion, okay, something that we are quite used to here, but you might actually struggle to engage your international students in that because they're less familiar with this. You might provide smaller opportunities for those students to move out of their comfort zones by scaffolding participation. And you already mentioned that you're doing that, for example, using Mentimeter, and I'm sure you know what the benefits are of using Mentimeter. It's anonymity, it's a little bit time for writing that the students get there. It also allows you to assess the knowledge the students have and where you might have to fill some gaps. So that can be quite a sort of low risk participatory activity that you can do in a class. And then you can build it up by having a mixed ways of engaging students. So breaking up in pairs and bus groups, having individual written tasks and reflective tasks built into your classroom. And you might do that, you might set the scene by actually doing that from the very beginning. So for example, in the first class, really working with icebreakers and getting students to know each other and get to know students from other cultures. So really intentionally mixing them up and also thinking about how you might sustain that interaction over the course of the semester. So one example is to maybe have a short peer learning activity at the beginning of each class and making that a sort of habit that students then come to expect, so that the first 5 minutes of a class will always be spent with a peer, summarizing and revising maybe what happened in the last class or so and catching each other up. So that way you kind of encourage that ongoing interaction with each other. So I don't know, we've got a few, is that something you see yourself doing with, also a reminder that that active learning and interactions need to be continuously supported. So it's great if we see it at the beginning and we set the scene and we create the environments, but they need to be maintained and supported in an intentional way as well. So it starts with informing students about expectations. We might even set ground rules and expectations for learning tasks. And really, as who said it now? Was it Hazel? Who said they're making the connection? Yeah, Hazel, it was you. Who said sometimes you have to join the dots for students between intended learning outcomes and their graduate attributes and what they might be doing in workplace. And you might have to do that for them repeatedly. And we know from our strategy work streams that in the professional skills pillar of the previous strategy, what students were often lacking is to articulate that part, to actually articulate what they've learned in class and how they've learned can actually connect to professional skills and what they might need in the workplace, or employers complained about that. So actually starting to join those dots for students might be helpful and give them the opportunity to do that, to make those connections. Explaining active learning conventions, for example, that you can ask a question to initiate discussion. So for example, for some students, it seems impolite just to step in. So you might actually initiate discussion by asking a question and really more actively inviting them in to that. In terms of group work skills and to support them, I can really recommend the student learning and development session. They do workshops with specific cohorts that have a high international student number and work on group work projects together. And that has been quite successful. So they can help you. They have 2 international learning advisors in that team. And apart from that, I've put a few references and resources together that you can check out further. I would definitely recommend Christina's Page's video suite, Getting to Know Your International Students, of which you've seen a little bit of a video there. But as I said, we have our own version the International Student Starter Pack, which has videos of international students speaking, but under each video, you also get some reflective prompts for your own practice for staff. So it's not just for students, but students also get some resources and tips on how to work with particular experiences. And then just some name pronouncing tools, because I found them very useful for myself, because I'm very reticent in saying the wrong, pronouncing names wrongly. Okay, and do you have any questions or comments left before we leave for today?